I'm Jason Saugey, and I took the conductor score and the piano reduction and used that as a as the sort of the raw material to produce the transcription or the arrangement of the score that we used for this production.
Awesome. And then you also played.
And then I played the organ part, right.
So all the organ you hear, and then you also worked with Susan, the pianist, to kind of decide what things would be covered by the piano and what things would be covered by the organ, which is part of the transcription process. So we started to all talk, the three of us, in terms of what this might look like, I think, back in, well, maybe you and John talked in March or early on in the spring, and then you and I and John talked in the summer about, you know, rehearsal calendar, and we got you the materials, the scores and everything. And so like, tell us on your end a little bit about what the beginning parts that maybe we didn't see that you did in terms of your initial involvement in the project.
All right, well, as soon as I received the package of materials, which was the piano reduction, which we ultimately played from, that was our working score. But the most important part at that, or piece at that point of the development, was the conductor score, because that shows all of the instruments, you know, in complete detail, where, you know, who plays what instrument plays what, and that's the information that's not necessarily in the piano reduction or the voice book. So I went through with both scores open to identify, you know, what instrument sets or what instrument families are involved in various parts of the accompaniment, and then at the same time sort of listening with a general organ ear how to translate that symphonic sound to another symphonic sound but made by the organ. So, and then, you know, then at the same time I had the stop list.
Yeah, tell us what that is, because some people might not know what that is.
Well, the OBU instrument is made by the Reuter Company. So I've been calling it the OBU Reuter. It has what we would say 32 ranks. So that gives us an idea of the size of the instrument. So a rank of pipes is simply a set of pipes that would correspond to the keys of the keyboard. And this organ has 32 of those sets. So roughly each set would be a voice, sort of an instrumental voice, so to speak. So, you know, a flute stop would be a rank, a flute rank. You know, and so there are some stops or some sounds that might consist of a couple ranks. But generally there's one rank per stop, you know, in sort of very basic terms.
So each organ, pipe organ, and possibly digital or combination instruments have a list that if, for instance, you don't play that organ every day like with you, that you could take that list and you get a sense of like, oh, we have X amount of trumpet stops, or we have X amount of flute stops, or string sounds, and principal organ sounds, and then that helped you kind of be creative when you didn't already really know the instrument, even before you stepped foot on campus.
That's right, yeah. So, you know, throughout that process of analyzing the conductor score in respect to the piano reduction, that I was taking notes based on the stop list from the OBU Reuter, so that I would have an idea already, sort of a hypothetical registration. That is a selection of different sets of stops for every section of the score. And then at that point, once I had done that general work, I couldn't really take that information to my instrument at the cathedral, because it has a completely different character, and there are stops that I have there that are not here, and then the other way around. There are some things here that aren't there. and plus that, this is where we were performing it. So I, still in the summer before the semester began, I came to the hall, to the OBU Reuter, and started working out the actual registrations. Working from page 1 all the way to the end, and then setting up that initial sort of sound scheme, for the organ part. And at that same time, I was analyzing what would be playable by the piano, or what would sort of fit in best for with the attributes of the piano being sort of a pitched. From my standpoint as an organist, thinking of the piano more as a pitched percussion instrument. Pianists will probably take me out and shoot me if I say that they play a pitched percussion instrument, but that was a really good quality to think about, for in terms of pizzicato things, or just very percussive, sections that need a little bit, just a sort of a decaying sound that has a little bit more bite to it. That's not particularly, something from the percussion section. And then of course the percussion parts that we used were just, they were from the original orchestration, so that didn't need any alteration. They just fit right in.
Yeah. Okay, so I think when we first started talking, we being John and I, were still thinking that things were gonna be more normal, and we might do a live production involving the organ. And then, I don't think John or I totally agree on when this happened. Not that we don't agree, it's just we don't remember probably.
I don't think we remember
when we decided to go with the video, but it kind of sort of organically happened.
Yeah.
But so like, what changed in your mind in terms of the process when you found out that we were going to shift to a video recording project from the live performance?
Well, it brought the score from, the 59 or 60-minute work, through composed work into a series of smaller sections. So, from a tonal standpoint, or an arrangement standpoint, everything else was as we would have done it otherwise. But from a performance standpoint, there were certain sections that I think it's something that's really unique to organ playing, is that all of the registrations, and when I say registration, the combination of stops to produce different sound groups or sound types throughout the score are saved on what we call pistons. So the organ itself can capture those combinations. So throughout the score, of course, this is true for any music that you play at the organ. You make a note of what setting. Here we have 12 what we call general pistons. So and then 8 divisional pistons for each manual. So I notate which piston goes where in which section. And those, a lot of times the piston changes are just as important as playing the notes. And it's sometimes something that you have to practice, just pushing the pistons to change your registration at certain places that might come very quickly. So it's sort of the gymnastics part of sort of writing the console, so to speak. So there were some places in the score that, had these quick shifts like that, but a lot of times, most of those were removed because of the way that we ended up performing the opera. So there were, it almost simplified, playing it at the organ.
In terms of balance, I know as a conductor, if we would have done this live, I feel like you and I would have had a lot more conversations about, we need a little more organ here or a little less organ here. But in the recording process, did you find you didn't feel like you worried as much about that because it could be altered later, or how was that the same or different?
Right. That's always a concern with a live performance, because there has to be that balance, and the OBU instrument is interesting because when I first met the instrument, it's almost like meeting a person, because they all have their personalities, and the first thing it told me was, I love playing Bach, but I'll play other things if you can. If you treat me right, I'll give you other things too. But my first love is anything prior to 1750.
Mm.
That's the nature of that instrument. Yeah. There are some instruments that will say, I hate Bach and I will not play it for you.
Mm.
I want Messiaen, I want Vierne or whatever. Mm-hmm. But so this instrument tends more towards Baroque literature, or prefers that. So as a one of the indications of that is that only one of the divisions is under expression. But for the as a switch off, the swell shades are right in front as part of the facade, mm-hmm. which I was really excited to play this organ that has that the audience can sort of see mm-hmm. the interaction of the instrument. So
there's great visuals on it.
Yeah. So there's that ability to interact almost with the instrument. As it's like it has eyebrows that open and close. So that was really an interesting feature to it. But there's only one division that's under expression. So that sort of put a lot of the focus into that division, and then bringing things out of that division onto other manuals, and then using the other smaller division or more quieter division, which is the choir organ, the positive organ, the lowermost manual, as sort of a flute solo division, and then the main manual, the great, which is the central manual, I reserve for loud things that either could just be obnoxious against the full chorus singing. I think there's one time that I pull on that giant trumpet, mm-hmm. and it is everyone, and it's a very dissonant. It's a very dissonant section because my G major chords don't match mm-hmm. with anything else, mm-hmm. And then but the first time that trumpet blast comes is on that giant great trumpet that's just out in the room. There's no expression on it at all, mm-hmm. and I think it sort of blasted everyone into the lobby the first time I did it at rehearsal.
But see, what was great is we realized at some point, it was some conversation with Mark or you or me or somebody, and we realized, especially when we were recording just the accompaniment parts, that there was no need for you to hold back in the room at that time, because there was
nice,
mics on the percussion and the piano, and so he can control that on the other end of things.
Exactly.
Which gives you a whole nother dimension of palette and creativity that you can use in those spots.
Right.
Yeah,
so that's
a degree of expression we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. So in that way, the entire organ could be put into a box with swell shades. Mm-hmm. Which gives us a lot more color possibility. That we can sort of get the flavor of those reeds without getting the sting of those reeds in a way, the auditory sting.
Yeah. Well, John, do you have some questions?
I was just going to ask, in relation with accompanying for an opera, is this something you've done on the organ before? Have you done an opera on the organ before?
I have not done an opera on the organ before. I've done oratorio work mm-hmm. on the organ, and that's something that organists typically do. Especially come Christmas time, mm-hmm. everyone wants parts of the Messiah, and then around Easter time you have more parts of the Messiah.
And Elijah sort of maybe every now and then.
Right, yeah, and then the Elijah, that sort of thing. But even with oratorio, it's sort of become a tradition that, if those are done with organ, it still has an organ sound, as opposed to the actual orchestral sound. But with this project, I was trying to get as close to the orchestral sound as I could, as opposed to playing the Hallelujah chorus at the organ and having the organ accompaniment. But with this project, I was trying more in mind to say, the organ is standing in for an orchestra, so it needs to be as much like an actual orchestra as it could be. But that sort of work I've done with some violinists from the Arkansas Symphony, with solo violin and orchestral repertoire, the Bruch Violin Concerto, the Mozart Sinfonia Concertate, most recently with viola and violin, so that the orchestral part, as at the organ, actually mimics, the organ actually mimics the orchestral part. And then I think one of the big things that has I worked with the violinist Drew Irvin, the concertmaster of the symphony, and one of it's almost sort of become our signature piece. It's the Vaughan Williams Lark Ascending.
Oh, okay.
And this fantastic violin rhapsody, tone poem, but then the orchestral part is equally as rhapsodic, and you hear these nature sounds and different solo stops, different birds, and sort of thing. So that was another sort of example of going to the score to see what instrument is making that sound, and how can I make that sound as close as I can get, from the organ.
It's interesting with this project because we're all three organists, so it's.
I consider myself a recreational organist.
Oh, yeah, you play beautifully. I heard you play. Do you think that what do you feel like the organ brought to this project, and what do you think the students learned from this experience by having an organ as opposed to an orchestra? Do you think that made their experience any different?
I think the organ was sort of like an all-in-one orchestra in a way, and I think we had a bigger degree of control in a lot of ways. That we weren't looking at a pit full of people that everyone had to come along as a group. So we had this small ensemble that had that big sound. So I think we were more easily maneuverable. I think in that regard. Yeah. And then it was sort of the all-in-one place feel. For the singers, I think that it was just the orchestra was right there. It was above them instead of sort of in front of them. It was a different angle.
So what was your take on, like, I guess we ask almost everybody some form of this question, which is, opera and pandemic, I mean, we would have had this same conversation, I think, but we'd have been having it about a live performance. But other than switching to a recording process, how else has the pandemic impacted your role in the opera?
Well, the fact that we had to rehearse just in short sections, the way that everything had to sort of be chopped up, as opposed to long rehearsals of big chunks, or focusing on certain sections over a period of time. Having to police ourselves to say, well, the room needs to air out now. And that's when you're working on things on your own, you can take your mask off. Like when in the summer, coming here, you know, I was probably the only one on the second floor of the building, you know, at that time. So, you know, I just moved in for 2 or 3 hours at a session and just worked as long as I needed to work for that day. I usually had a goal set of, you know, I would work from rehearsal or whatever to this, you know, and then register and troubleshoot and that sort of thing. So, and then that really could be as long as I needed to, you know, as long as I could get out of the building, I was fine. You know, as long as I stayed as long as I needed to stay, you know.
Of course, then that
So-
flipped on its head when semester started because
Right.
one of
Of
the
course.
most popular rooms on campus is the recital hall for classes
Sure.
and ensemble and other
Right.
lessons and
Right.
courses. And so then it's like almost you went from massive amounts of availability to very minimal amounts of availability
Right.
in
Yeah.
the room. And I'm sure it was kind of like,
Right, and that was also one of, because that's sort of the bane of being an organist, is you practice whenever you can.
yeah.
It's, you know, pianists, they might have a piano at home, or there's always a practice room with a piano in it. There's somewhere there's a piano that's available. But organists, you know, we might have a practice room with an organ-shaped instrument in it. You know, it might have 2 manuals, a stop that works, and kind of a pedal board. And you know,
So you've seen
or-
our other organ band.
I passed by when the door was open. I thought, oh, I know what that is.
Bless its heart.
That's the
No, I just say a little prayer thanking
every,
God every time I switch the switch and nothing burns
You
down.
never
Oh,
know what's
yeah.
gonna happen.
Yeah. Every university has a couple of those hidden somewhere in last resort instruments. But you know, but the concert hall instrument is the performance instrument, and it's always the one that you can't have access to the most. When I was in school, my practice time was midnight to 3 a.m.
I believe that.
because no one wanted that time. You know, there might be a maintenance person in there screwing out light bulbs around midnight, but you know, otherwise that was the safest time that I could, you know, sit and do that. So that was another reason why I came in, you know, early on at the instrument, because I knew as soon as the semester began, there would be all kinds of traffic going in there. But you know, then even you know, even with the opera class, when we were rehearsing together, that was segmented. You know, even though we had that bigger window of time, there were still segments within that we had to allow the room to breathe out.
And even the recordings, you know,
Right.
in the evening.
Yeah.
You know, we were limited there.
Yeah.
So,
So it projected, you know, it projected the performance time, you know, from the hour that it would usually have taken, you know, from start to finish. But it was just a different way, a different approach to it. But you know, putting all the pieces together, you know, the end result is still, you know, practically a live performance. You know.
I think it's interesting that the choices that we made going into this being a live performance, you know, choosing to do this with organ, the things we made actually ended up allowing us to actually do the project. Because had we tried to do that with an orchestra, we simply never would have been able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we're able to take those choices that we made and turn them into positives that allow the project to actually happen.
Right. Yeah. There was a lot more versatility with it.
Yes.
You know.
I think the work you did on this sets this project apart and makes it unique and different from anything anyone else is doing this season. And I know, I speak for Josh. I know that we couldn't have done this without you. And I appreciate your just your willingness to jump in and see what happened with this, which is to an extent that was some of what we did.
Right. Yeah. It was an adventure, but you know, I was up for the adventure. I guess I'm just crazy enough. You know, and then you know, when John called me, I thought, well, you know, he has this fabulous idea, and I think we'll be able to do it. You know, I think
I think it lends itself to Puccini quite well.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Particular to Puccini, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, those long string sections. You know, the cash register aria. You know, the only piece that everyone comes to hear this opera for. I think it really took on authenticity with those strings.
It had that sustained sound behind it.
It was.
You can only get with a sustaining instrument.
Exactly.
Strings or organ. Yeah.
Right. You know, because it's really funny because, you know, with the Baroque organ like that, it has really nice strings, and I just, you know, coupled those strings up and down to try to give what we call the riverside sound.
Yes.
Yeah. And that comes from Riverside Church in New York City, where Virgil Fox ruled the roost, you know.
Yes.
And that, you know, if you listen to his very symphonic interpretations of Bach, you know, which, you know, I think they're every organist's sort of secret joy. They don't admit that they have that record because, you know,
Slipped in a different cover.
it is. That's right. But you know, if you listen to that, even the D minor toccata and fugue, it's almost like theater organ. But that's what we sort of call the river. We typically just call it the riverside sound with and it's just every string you have coupled at 4 foot and 16 foot and just, you know, this big wall of lush. And so this organ does a really good job with that.
Well, I know John and I have really tried. I mean, the dean made this comment to me at one time that's like, well, the organ has gotten more use in the last 2 years than it had the previous 20. And I don't know if he said previous 20, but it was something to that effect. And I just,
It has.
when one of my teachers at Baylor, I remember her saying, you know, we want to make friends of the organ.
Oh, yeah.
And I love how this particular project gave us another opportunity to show people that, yeah, you know, there is something
Right.
that does make sound, you know, because the kids come in
It
and
does
out.
something other than play hymns.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some wonderful things. You know, and like I said, when I first came to the organ, and it just stomped its foot and said, "I'm a Bach organ," you know. But looking at, you know, like at that swell division, you know, it had inclinations otherwise. It secretly was a lover of Virgil Fox.
It may have had on a white dress, but it had a big red hem.
That's right.
Well, and the other thing I've learned about working with you on this is you really get a glimpse into the creativity of the organist. That, like, you know, and you play lovely in lessons, in my voice lessons, but I just get a whole nother sense of your creativity and musicality and expression when you're at the organ console that I never would see at the keyboard accompaniment.
Right.
And so it was just lovely to be able to work with you and I, you know, the thing is, organists, which this may be absolute D- role, we may not use it, but, you know, organists have a reputation, some of being hard to collaborate with.
Right.
And you've certainly been a pleasure to work with on this project, and so, given all the constraints of time and rehearsal, and, you know, it just felt like it was so, you know, fragmented and different from the process that we've ever been through. And I mean, John and I were kind of inventing the wheel as we went because we didn't know what Mark needed. And I think Mark didn't know everything he needed either. And so he was great at communicating with us, and we tried our best to kind of problem solve and strategize. And I remember there were times that I was just like, I'm sure we've recorded this.
Yeah.
You know, and it could have been that we rehearsed it, and I thought, or the kids didn't push the record button or whatever. But anyway, I just appreciate your flexibility and your willingness to try all of this. And
absolutely. Well, I think it takes a little bit of being willing to be adventuresome, and I think all three of us had the end product already envisioned, and like you said, it was all new territory to start with, without the COVID going on. And even then, it would have been sort of a similar process to say, well, we have to experiment. We would have had different, like we talked about expression, we would have had different aspects to work out too. And that's really all part of the big adventure, I think, with especially doing something that hasn't been, or doing something in a way that hasn't been done before, to work out, a way to do
we
it.
didn't really break ground here with this. We haven't. I mean, I don't think we've really quite realized what we did yet, because we still haven't seen the end product. But it's.
I can't wait. I mean, I
remember the first time I heard everything coming together. I mean, I actually cried the first time I heard everything come together, because it was. I had an idea that this would sound good, but it was just so far beyond even what I hoped that it would do.
I mean, I had a similar reaction when I first listened to the audio, because I had to listen to it to make sure I got everything.
Right.
So I went all the way through it. And I remember texting John, I was like, oh my gosh, I can hear the students, which I hadn't been able to do because of the distancing. I could hear all of the dimensions of your creativity at the organ. Susan's fabulous playing at the keyboard.
Yes.
And the percussion then on top of that. And it was like, all of a sudden I go from hearing just sort of vague parts to actually hearing things. And I was like, wow, this is really fantastic and something we're going to all be very proud of.
Right.
So, but...
yeah, it was, and I think the entire team, even Susan also, we all had that end product in mind and thinking, and I felt that we all really worked so well together, thinking that that if A doesn't work, B will work, or if B doesn't work, we'll try C, or it might be a combination of A and C, and we'll get it. Because there were times that from my initial registration of the work, I told myself from that point, well, now the real work begins, because now we have the singers on top of that. So I might be listening to a chorus of extremely loud singers, very very bold singers. Or they might be a little bit more timid than that. So I may be too loud, or I may be too soft. And in the process of this, there were points that I was too loud and points that I was far too soft. So that I think the first time that we actually ran through, we did it from the beginning to the end over a period of time. That was when I was really able to sort of tweak and figure out.
Well, I was so glad we did that at that point, because we did 2 of them before we started recordings. Then there was the Doomsday one where it was like, you must be on level by this point, the student singers. And then the one prior to that where it was just like, we just want to see where we're at so we know how to spend our time.
Right. Yeah.
And there was something about both that when we did a run, and when we started doing recordings and we only had time to do 2 takes of each thing, that I felt the students really rose to the occasion, because they knew they had to.
Yeah.
And so, where before it was just like, well, I guess we could browbeat this one section ad nauseum until we run out of time in the room. And so that sense of urgency, I think, was really helpful when we got to those phases.
Yeah, and then
that's when it became real.
It becomes very very real, and then there's a strangeness about recording music that will be performed, like just music that will be recorded to be played, as a recording, as opposed to performing it to an audience. And that's one thing that I've learned really since the COVID crisis began. There were a couple things that I recorded with Drew Irvin. I recorded the Lark Ascending, and then the Brook Adagio Appassionato, which is full of all this crazy rubato and lots of registration changes, and then the Mozart Concertate. And we Drew and I both observed that when you perform in front of a live audience, you get energy from the people who are watching you that goes into your performance. So it's almost it's a different there's a much different feel when you're in an empty room, because it's almost like your battery, you don't have your battery in.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and you it's easy to get in your head when you're performing like that, because there's no one watching you, and there's no that dynamic isn't there. You know, or no one listening live, and that I found it can be even more difficult to perform in that sort of dryness, in a way, as opposed to a live performance. You know, that there's that, you know, even though the public is being quiet, there's still an interaction there, and you can feel that. So, and I think the singers had that sort of idea also, that, you know, all these microphones, you know, they pick up everything, and no mistakes.
Well, now
Yeah.
it's like, I feel like when I was in college, it would be really easy to have a choral concert and no one would ever hear it again if it wasn't recorded, right?
Yeah.
And so in some respects, it was like, it is what it is, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
as performers, we're like, it is what it is, because nobody's gonna ever hear it
Yeah.
after this. So let's get it over with some of our groups. Nowadays, it's like, there's a phone recording somewhere every time you open your
Oh, yeah.
mouth or go to play something, and it's there. So
Yeah.
I almost feel like there's like even more of that sense of urgency nowadays than
Yeah.
there used to be.
Oh yeah, and just with technology in general, you know, there's been over the years a movement towards absolute perfection. You know, that if it's to be recorded, it has to be completely perfect. But, you know, I think it was Pablo Casals who said, you know, as that became more and more the case, that, you know, it's more exciting, you know, the old recordings, you know, the old 78s, that, you know, you had one take and that was it.
Yeah.
You know, once it was cut, it was cut, you know, warts and all. That those recordings are, you know, much more exciting, much more human, that sort of thing. So we've sort of programmed ourselves in the last couple decades that, you know, if it's recorded, there's, you know, we take no prisoners. So, you know, I think we tend to set the bar higher than we typically would. You know, if we had the live performance, that, you know, maybe with a hidden microphone, that we wouldn't we wouldn't have that idea. So yeah, that it changes the game, I think, in a lot of ways.
So I just have one last question. Have you encountered any ghosts in our building?
No ghosts here.
Really?
No ghosts.
I was almost sure there'd be at least like 3 or 4.
I haven't. No, I haven't.
You know someone's died in the building.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Okay, no, I haven't. I haven't encountered any. Which is, they're usually attracted to organs. We had UA Fayetteville. We had a ghost in the concert hall
Oh, really?
that would come up. Loved Bach typically,
Really?
and I corroborated the story with some friends who would, you know, go in and, you know, practice in there as well. So if it, you know, we used to call it the ghost lesson, because you just felt a presence behind you. If you were working up some Bach, either on the piano or the organ, you had that feeling. Really interesting. But you know, of course, at the cathedral there are lots of ghosts.
Oh, I'm sure.
They come and go, and, you know, different. You know, they don't like Hindemith. One.
Well, I would be in good company.
One of our ghosts does not like Hindemith. He'll pound his boots across from south transept to north transept. And
Really?
it's time to change your repertoire for the day.
That's great.
And then I've been doing some. We did the Mozart recording, the Symphony of Concertante at First Presbyterian downtown, and that also has its share of interesting ghosts that come in. There's a little girl who's been documented that loves the organ and comes and sits on the bench.
Oh wow.
So, but I can't tell any stories like that about
Ouachita.
Yeah.
Well, and I would have been sure there would be.
Yeah.
Oh, I intend to haunt Ouachita. I'll
Oh, yeah, there
Oh,
you go.
okay. You'll give the secret lesson then.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The ghost lesson.
He'll be there for people who are not prepared, who need a little, spiritual battery charge,
And I'll be able to tell them that Jesus told me, because that's where I'll be.
because that's where I'll be.
Yeah.
Well,
The communion of saints.
fingers crossed.
That's right. Well, awesome.
Gosh, well, thanks, Jason. This has been,
Thank you.
this is a great interview. This is gonna be fantastic
Great.
on there.
Thanks.
Yeah.